The silence was the first thing that hit Kristen Barker. Not the peaceful, curated quiet of his Upper East Side mansion, but a dead, hollow void that consumed the space. The air, usually circulating with the faint scent of lilies and lemon oil, was stale. He dropped his leather weekender, the thud echoing off the marble floors. "Maria," he called out, his voice sounding foreign in his own home. He walked through the grand foyer, past the silent living room, and up the sweeping staircase. In their bedroom, a single object sat on her nightstand, catching the sliver of moonlight from the window, a positive pregnancy test. And beside it, a note. 2 sentences in her perfect script that shattered his world. The morning Kristen left, the air in the 6,000-square-foot penthouse was already thin with unspoken words. Maria Truitt stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the yellow cabs crawl along Fifth Avenue like beetles. She was 3 months pregnant, a secret she held coiled in her stomach like a nervous bird. The morning sickness had been relentless, a daily reminder of the life growing inside her, and the chasm growing between her and her husband. She hadn't told him yet. How could she? Every attempt to connect, to find the man she'd married 5 years ago, was met with a wall of polite indifference. Kristen Barker, a man who had built a private equity empire by seeing 10 steps ahead, was blind to the person standing 5 feet away from him. He moved through the master suite with practiced efficiency, his reflection, sharp suit, confident jaw, flashing in the mirrored closet doors. His suitcase, a sleek Rimowa, was already packed by the door. "Everything set for the St. Bart's trip?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly, a gesture she quickly hid. "It's not a trip, Maria. It's a strategic retreat," he corrected, without looking at her. He was fastening a Patek Philippe to his wrist, the metallic click punctuating the silence. "The Sterling Reed acquisition is in its final stages. Scott Stotler and I need to iron out the finer points without the noise of the city." Scott Stotler. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. The new wunderkind partner Kristen had brought on 6 months ago. Scott was everything Kristen admired, ruthless, innovative, and unburdened by sentiment. Lately, the name was on Kristen's lips more often than hers. Late nights at the office became strategy sessions with Scott. Weekend calls were running numbers with Scott. Maria had seen them together at a gala once. Scott, with his sharp, tailored suits and an easy charm that felt predatory, had barely acknowledged her existence. "I see," she said softly. She had planned to tell him today. She had imagined it 100 times, a quiet dinner, a small wrapped gift with tiny baby shoes inside, a flicker of the old warmth returning to his eyes. But looking at him now, a stranger in a hurry, the words died in her throat. "Don't wait up for me," he said, finally turning to her. He scanned her attire, a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, with a flicker of something unreadable. Was it disappointment? "I'll be back Friday. We have the museum benefit on Saturday, so make sure you have that blue dress from the couturier ready." He didn't ask how she was. He didn't notice the faint shadows under her eyes or the way she'd lost weight in her face. He was giving instructions, managing his asset. A wave of nausea and a surge of unexpected anger rose in her. "What if I don't want to go to the benefit, Kristen?" He paused, genuinely surprised by the resistance. "Don't be difficult, Maria. It's important for appearances. You know that." He walked over and gave her a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. His cologne, a scent she once loved, now smelled sterile, like a hospital. "I'll call you from the island. Be good." The condescension in those 2 words, "be good," was a slap. It was what you said to a child or a pet. As the front door clicked shut, Sealing her inside the silent, opulent cage, Maria felt the full weight of her isolation. This magnificent apartment, with its panoramic views of Central Park, had become her prison. Her life, once vibrant with her own ambitions in art curation, had been slowly eroded, replaced by the all-consuming role of being Mrs. Kristen Barker. He hadn't forced her to quit her job at the gallery. He had simply made it impossible to continue, with a social calendar so demanding and a life so insular that her own world had simply faded away. She walked slowly into their master bathroom, a cavern of Italian marble and polished chrome. Her reflection looked pale, a ghost haunting a palace. She had married Kristen for his drive, his brilliance, his promises of a partnership. But somewhere along the way, partnership had become ownership. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a beautiful, silent testament to his success. And now, there was a baby. Their baby. A life that deserved more than a father who saw his family as an accessory, and a mother who was slowly disappearing. The nausea returned, but this time it wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the sickening realization that the man she loved was gone, and the man who remained would never be the father her child deserved. Not like this. Standing there, with the city's indifferent hum below, a new feeling began to take root in the pit of her stomach, pushing past the fear and the sickness. It was a cold, hard seed of resolve. She had been good for too long. The private jet descended toward Gustav III Airport, a ribbon of tarmac nestled between a steep hill and the turquoise sea. From his window seat, Kristen watched the island of St. Bart's materialize from the azure expanse of the Caribbean. It was a playground for the world's elite, a place where billion-dollar deals were sealed over rosé on the decks of superyachts. It was his natural habitat. Almost there, Scott Stotler said, leaning across the aisle. He was dressed in a crisp linen shirt, his smile as bright and artificial as the resort brochures. Ready to close the deal of the decade? Ready to be done with it, Kristen replied, his gaze still fixed on the window. An unsettling feeling had been gnawing at him since he left New York. He'd dismissed it as pre-deal jitters, but it felt different. It felt personal. He thought of Maria's face when he left, the strange defiance in her eyes. What if I don't want to go? She'd never questioned him like that before. The villa was spectacular, a modern architectural marvel carved into the hillside of Lurin, with an infinity pool that bled into the horizon. A personal butler uncorked a bottle of vintage champagne as they arrived. Scott raised his glass. To Sterling Reed, he toasted. And to us, the new kings of the street. Kristen clinked his glass against Scott's, but the celebratory fizz felt flat. For the next 2 days, they worked. They spread financial projections across a glass table overlooking the ocean, their laptops humming in the tropical heat. Scott was brilliant, his mind a razor-sharp instrument that sliced through complex problems with an almost surgical precision. He was charming and witty, and Kristen could see why he was so effective in a boardroom. But as the hours wore on, Kristen started to notice the cracks in Scott's polished facade. There was a dismissiveness in the way Scott spoke about the people they were acquiring, a casual cruelty disguised as business acumen. He was a shark who loved the taste of blood. During a break, Kristen's phone buzzed. It was Maria. He ignored it. "Wife checking in?" Scott asked, not looking up from his screen. "Something like that," Kristen muttered. "Give them an inch. They take a mile," Scott said with a knowing smirk. "Best to keep them on a short leash. They appreciate the structure." The comment landed with a thud, echoing the very sentiment Kristen had felt when he'd told Maria to be good. Hearing it from someone else, so crudely put, made him deeply uncomfortable. He thought of Maria in their quiet apartment, managing the vast emptiness of their life while he was here, in paradise, with a man who viewed relationships as transactions. That evening, after a dinner of grilled lobster at a chic beachside restaurant, the pretense of business finally dissolved. They returned to the villa, the night air thick with the scent of jasmine and salt. Scott poured 2 glasses of aged rum. "You know, Christen," Scott began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "We're more alike than you think. We see the world for what it is. A game. The only thing that matters is winning." He moved closer, his presence suddenly intimate, invasive. "That acquisition, it's just the beginning. With your capital and my vision, there's no ceiling." Scott's hand rested on Christen's shoulder. The gesture lingered a fraction of a second too long. In that moment, Christen understood the full scope of their partnership. It wasn't just about business. It was about power, about allegiance, about a shared worldview that prized ambition above all else. This trip wasn't just a strategic retreat. It was a seduction, an invitation to fully embrace the ruthless, detached persona he had so carefully constructed. His phone buzzed again. Maria. This time he felt a sharp, inexplicable pang of something. Guilt. No, that wasn't it. It was a longing for a different kind of quiet. Not the sterile silence of their penthouse, but the comfortable silence they used to share years ago, when they would read in bed together, their feet tangled under the sheets. When had that stopped? He pulled away from Scott's touch. "I should call her back." Scott's smile tightened. "Don't tell me the great Christen Barker is domesticated. I thought you were past all that." "It's complicated," Christen said, the words tasting like a lie. It wasn't complicated at all. It was brutally simple. He had made a choice, long ago, to prioritize the game. Maria was simply a casualty of his ambition. He had told himself it was what success required. But as he stood on the balcony, with the stars glittering over a dark, indifferent ocean, and a man he didn't respect standing behind him, he felt a profound emptiness. He had won, and won, and won. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something far more valuable along the way. He silenced his phone, pushing the feeling down. There would be time for complications later. Right now, there was a deal to close. Christen Barker stepped out of the black Escalade and into the jarring silence of his own life. The St. Bart's trip had been a success. The Sterling Reed deal was signed, a landmark acquisition that would be front-page news in the Wall Street Journal. Scott was ecstatic, already planning the next corporate conquest. But the triumph felt hollow, the victory tasting of seawater and regret. The entire flight back, a single thought had looped in his mind. He needed to talk to Maria. Really talk, for the first time in years. He walked into the mansion, the heavy oak door closing behind him with a funereal boom. "Maria!" he called out. The silence that answered was absolute. It seeped from the cold marble floors and dripped from the crystal chandeliers. An unnerving stillness had claimed the space. The perfectly arranged lilies in the foyer were wilting, their petals browning at the edges. The staff had the day off. It should have been just her. He took the stairs 2 at a time, a knot of dread tightening in his chest. "Maria," he called again, his voice strained. The master bedroom was empty. The bed was perfectly made, but it was the bed their housekeeper made, crisp and impersonal. Maria's bed was always a nest of pillows and rumpled sheets. On his side of the bed, on his nightstand, sat his watch window, his valet tray, his world exactly as he'd left it. On her side, there was only the pregnancy test and the note. He picked up the test first, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. The word detonated in the quiet of his mind. Maria was pregnant. A flash of memory, her hand on her stomach that morning, her strange question about the benefit, the shadows under her eyes. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. She had been trying to tell him, and he had been too busy, too important, too gone. His hand shaking, he reached for the note. It was written on her personal stationery, the heavy cream-colored paper embossed with her initials. M.T. Maria Truitt. Not MB. The detail was a tiny, sharp cut. The note said, "You've already chosen your future. I'm going to choose ours. Ours." The word was an enigma. Him and her and the baby, or just her and the baby? He read it again and again, the elegant script mocking him. It wasn't an angry, tear-stained letter. It was calm, resolute, and utterly final. It was the note of a woman who had made a decision, not a plea from a woman who was hurting. A cold panic, unlike any boardroom pressure he'd ever felt, seized him. He pulled out his phone, his thumb fumbling as he dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail, her cheerful, recorded voice, a ghost from a life that had existed only hours ago. "Maria, pick up the phone," he said into the silence. "This isn't funny. Whatever you're thinking, we can talk about it. I'm home. Just call me." He hung up and dialed her mother in Connecticut. "Kristen, how was St. Bart's?" Eleanor Truitt's voice was warm, oblivious. "Eleanor, is Maria with you?" he asked, his voice tight. "Maria?" "No, of course not. She's in the city. Is everything all right? You sound strange." "She's not here. There's a note." A pause. When Eleanor spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by an icy civility. "And why exactly would she have left a note, Kristen?" The unspoken accusation hung in the air. He made a clumsy excuse and hung up. He called her sister, her best friend from college, the gallery she used to work at. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. It was as if she had stepped out of their meticulously designed life and simply evaporated. He stalked through the apartment, opening closets, his heart pounding. Half her clothes were gone, her favorite sweaters, her comfortable jeans, the simple gold locket her grandmother had given her. But the designer gowns, the expensive jewelry he'd bought her, the symbols of her life as Mrs. Barker, they were all still there, hanging like costumes for a play that had closed. He sank onto the edge of their bed, the note clutched in his hand. The sheer intentionality of it was staggering. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was a calculated departure. She had planned this. While he was in paradise closing a deal, she was methodically erasing herself from his life. The arrogance that had defined him for so long began to crumble, replaced by a terrifying vulnerability. He had built an empire on the principle of control. Every variable managed, every outcome predicted. But he had never factored in the one person who shared his home, his bed, his life. He had treated her as a constant, a given, a beautiful fixture in the architecture of his success. He had never once considered that she had a choice. And now, in the deafening silence of the gilded cage he had built, Kristen Barker was faced with a terrifying new reality. He was completely, utterly alone. 1 week after Kristen returned to an empty home, the perfect facade of his life had developed visible cracks. The initial panic had morphed into a low, simmering dread that tainted every waking moment. Maria was still gone. Her phone remained off. Her bank accounts were untouched, save for a single, modest ATM withdrawal in cash the day she left. She had vanished as completely as a wisp of smoke. Kristen had done what powerful men do when faced with a problem they can't solve. He threw money at it. He hired Jason Pereira, a private investigator whose name had been passed to him with hushed reverence. Pereira was not the type of man Kristen was used to dealing with. He was quiet, unassuming, with watchful eyes that seemed to see right through Christen's tailored suits and carefully constructed composure. They sat in Christen's home office, a room panelled in dark mahogany that suddenly felt like a tomb. Pereira held a small notebook, his expression unreadable. "Let's go over it one more time, Mr. Barker," Pereira said, his voice calm but firm. "The morning you left, tell me everything she said. Everything you said. The exact words, if you can." Christen recounted the conversation, the words feeling clumsy and cruel as he spoke them aloud. "Don't be difficult. Be good. I told her to have the blue dress ready for a party." He felt a flush of shame. Hearing himself, he sounded like a monster, a petty, controlling tyrant. Pereira jotted down a note. "And you had no idea she was pregnant?" "None." The word was a lead weight. How could he have been so blind? All the signs had been there, hiding in plain sight. "The trip to St. Bart's," Pereira continued, his gaze unwavering. "You were there with your business partner, Scott Stotler. Was it strictly business?" The question was a scalpel, expertly inserted. "Yes," Christen said, too quickly. Pereira just looked at him, letting the silence stretch. He didn't accuse. He didn't push. He simply waited. It was a more effective interrogation technique than any shouting match. "Our partnership is multifaceted," Christen finally admitted, the corporate jargon a pathetic shield. "I see," Pereira said, though his eyes suggested he saw much more. "The thing is, Mr. Barker, people don't just vanish. They run. From something or to something. To understand where your wife went, I need to understand what she was running from. I need the whole picture, not the version you give to the press. The whole picture. The picture was ugly. It was a marriage hollowed out by ambition, a wife treated like a commodity, a husband who sought validation in the arms of a man who was a mirror image of his own worst qualities. Days bled into one another. Christen stopped going into the office. He sat in the silent mansion, the note and the pregnancy test on his desk, like a shrine to his failure. He found himself wandering into Maria's walk-in closet, touching the silk of the gowns she'd left behind. He remembered the day she'd bought one of them, a deep emerald dress. Her eyes had lit up when she tried it on. "It makes me feel like myself," she'd said. He'd barely looked up from his phone. "It's fine. Buy it." The PI's reports were thin. Maria was smart. She hadn't used credit cards. She wasn't staying with any known friends or family. She had withdrawn a few $1,000s, enough to live on for a while, but not enough to suggest a life of luxury. She had planned her escape with the precision of a spy. The cracks in his life began to spread. His business partners started calling, their voices edged with concern. The Sterling Reed integration was stalling without his leadership. Scott called incessantly, his voice a mixture of frustration and something else. "Fear? Christen, you need to get a grip," Scott's voice hissed over the phone. "Whatever domestic drama you're having, shelve it. We have a board to answer to. If word gets out that your wife left you and you're falling apart, it'll spook the investors. It makes you look unstable." "My pregnant wife is missing," Christen shot back, his voice raw. "Then find her quietly," Scott snapped. "Don't let this derail everything we've worked for." Everything we've worked for. The words hung in the air. For Scott, Maria was just a variable, a potential liability that needed to be managed. It was a chilling echo of Christen's own past behavior. He was looking at his reflection, and he was disgusted. That night, unable to sleep, Christen found an old photo album tucked away in a bookshelf. It was from the early years of their marriage. There they were, smiling in a small, cramped apartment in the West Village, before the money, before the empire. There was Maria, her face bright with laughter, holding up a misshapen pot she'd made in a pottery class. There was Christen, looking at her with an adoration that was so open, so genuine, it made his current self ache. He had been that man. A man who could love someone more than he loved a deal. Where had he gone? He hadn't just lost Maria. He had lost himself. Staring at the photograph, Kristen Barker finally did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He wept. It was a gut-wrenching, silent sob. A torrent of grief for the man he had failed to be. The wife he had driven away. And the child he might never know. The unraveling was complete. Now, he had to figure out how to build something new from the wreckage. 200 miles north of the city, in a small town nestled in the Hudson Valley, Maria Truitt was breathing for the first time in years. She had run, not to a 5-star hotel or a hidden resort, but to the one place she was certain Kristen's world would never touch, the cluttered, cozy home of her great-aunt Genevieve. Jen was a retired librarian in her late 70s, a woman who lived in a world of dusty first editions, overgrown gardens, and strong cups of herbal tea. She had taken one look at a pale, trembling Maria on her doorstep and simply said, "The guest room is ready, dear. You look like you could use a rest." There were no questions, no judgments, just a quiet, sturdy acceptance that was more healing than any words could be. The first week, Maria did little more than sleep. She slept off years of accumulated exhaustion, of walking on eggshells, of shrinking herself to fit into the small, ornamental box Kristen had built for her. The relentless morning sickness was her constant companion, a physical manifestation of the life she was purging. Slowly, the fog began to lift. She started spending her mornings in Jen's wild garden, her hands in the soil, feeling the solid, reassuring earth beneath her fingernails. She helped Jen prune the roses and weed the vegetable patch. The simple, honest work grounded her. Here, her worth wasn't measured by the designer she wore or the benefit she attended. It was measured by the ripeness of a tomato, the beauty of a blooming peony. She began to explore the small town of Cold Spring. It was the antithesis of her Manhattan life. The streets were lined with independent bookshops, antique stores, and cafes where people actually looked up from their phones and smiled at one another. It was here, in a bookstore called The Narrative, that she met Dr. Jason Pereira. He wasn't a doctor in the store, of course. He was just a man in a worn flannel shirt, searching for a collection of Mary Oliver poems. He and Maria reached for the same book at the same time, a cliché so charmingly out of place in her dramatic life that it made her laugh. A real, genuine laugh. "Sorry about that," he said, his smile warm and easy. "You can have it. Good choice." "You're a fan?" she asked. "Her work is an antidote to modern life," he said. "Reminds you what's real." They talked for 20 minutes, leaning against the bookshelves, about poetry, about the city versus the country, about the simple pleasure of a quiet afternoon. He told her he was a family doctor in town. He didn't ask about her, or why a woman with a sadness in her eyes was hiding out in Cold Spring. He just listened. He saw her, not the wife of a millionaire, not a story to be dissected. Just Maria. Their encounters became a quiet routine. A nod on the street, a brief chat at the farmer's market. Jason would ask her how she was feeling, and she found herself answering honestly. "Tired today," she'd admit. "The baby is making its presence known." He never pried about the father. He simply offered gentle advice. "Ginger tea helps with the nausea, and make sure you're getting enough iron." He'd recommend a local prenatal yoga class or a walking trail with a gentle incline. His kindness was simple, expecting nothing in return. It was a language Kristen had long forgotten how to speak. One afternoon, sitting on a bench overlooking the Hudson River, Maria felt the baby kick for the first time. A tiny, definitive flutter. It was a secret conversation, a promise between her and her child. In that moment, her decision to leave was reaffirmed with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. She wasn't just running from Kristen. She was running to this. To a life where her child could grow up surrounded by real things. Soil, books, quiet kindness. She was under no illusions. Life would be hard. She had limited funds and no clear plan. But for the first time, her future felt like her own. It was a blank page, and she was the one holding the pen. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was now overshadowed by a burgeoning sense of hope. Kristen had taken her name, her career, her confidence. But he couldn't take this. This life, this future, was hers to write, and she was finally ready to begin. She wasn't Maria Barker, the vanished wife. She was Maria Truitt, a mother-to-be, planting roots in the quiet, steady earth. Back in New York, Kristen Barker's world was contracting. The walls of his empire, once impenetrable, were beginning to show stress fractures. The private investigator, the other Jason Pereira, a man whose quiet competence felt like a constant judgment, had finally found a promising lead. A credit card charge, not from Maria, but one he recognized. Maria had an old, forgotten supplementary card on her great-aunt's account, a card she'd set up years ago for emergencies. It had been used once, a month prior, to purchase a prenatal yoga book from an online store with a shipping address in Cold Spring, New York. It was a thread, thin but tangible. Kristen felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar thrill of the hunt. He would go there, find her, and fix this. He would bring her home. But as he made plans, another crisis was reaching its boiling point. The Sterling Reed integration was failing spectacularly. Key executives from the acquired company were resigning, citing a hostile culture. The media was sniffing around, and the narrative they were weaving was one of chaos and instability at Barker Capital. And at the center of that narrative was Scott Stotler. Scott, desperate to control the damage, called an emergency board meeting. He strode into the conference room on the 50th floor, all sharp angles and predatory confidence, ready to pin the blame squarely on Kristen's personal distractions. "Kristen has been absent," Scott announced to the stern-faced board members. "His focus has been compromised by a domestic issue, and as a result, the transition has suffered. I propose that I take full operational control until he has resolved his private matters." It was a power play, slick and ruthless. The board murmured, their faces a mixture of concern and calculation. Kristen looked at Scott, at the man who was a perfect reflection of the monster he himself had become, a man who would sacrifice anyone and anything for the next win. And in that moment, something inside Kristen snapped. It wasn't about winning anymore. It wasn't about the deal or the money or the power. It was about the photograph in his desk drawer of a laughing woman covered in clay. Kristen stood up. The room fell silent. He wasn't the man who had left for St. Bart's. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion that was more compelling than any bravado. "He's right," Kristen said, his voice quiet but carrying across the vast room. "I have been absent. My focus has been compromised." He looked at each board member, making eye contact. "For years I have told myself, and all of you, that business comes first, that success requires a singular, relentless focus. I built this company on that principle, and I built my life on it too." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And I was wrong. My methods created a culture, both in this office and in my home, that valued results over people. It has cost this company valuable talent, and it has cost me my family." Scott's face was a mask of disbelief. This was not part of the script. "My wife, Maria, is pregnant," Kristen continued, the words raw and difficult. "And she has left me. She left because the man I had become was not someone she could build a future with." She was right. A collective gasp went through the room. This wasn't a business meeting anymore. It was a confession. "Scott's proposal is sound," Kristen said, his gaze finally landing on his former partner. "He embodies the principles on which Barker Capital was founded. But those principles are flawed. They are empty." He looked back at the board. "Therefore, I am taking an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately. I'm stepping down as CEO. You need someone whose head is in the game, and my head and my heart need to be somewhere else entirely." He turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving behind a stunned silence and the ruins of his professional life. He didn't feel regret. He didn't feel fear. For the first time in a decade, he felt a strange, terrifying lightness. He had torched his own empire, confessed his sins not to a priest, but to the gods of capitalism he had once worshipped. He walked out of the building, not waiting for his driver, and started walking downtown. He pulled out his phone and called the investigator. "Pereira," he said, "I'm done here. I'm going to Cold Spring, but not as a CEO coming to collect his wife. I'm going as a man who has a lot of listening to do." He was under no illusions. This wasn't an act that would win her back. It was simply the first step on a long, uncertain road toward becoming a man she wouldn't have to run from. The drive to Cold Spring was a 2-hour pilgrimage through his own failure. Every mile Kristen put between himself and the city, he felt the weight of his old life sloughing off. He wasn't Kristen Barker, the titan of industry. He was just Kristen, a man driving a borrowed sedan because his own car and driver felt like relics from another existence. He carried no grand plan of reconciliation, only a fragile hope for a conversation. He found Aunt Genevieve's house easily. It was a charming, slightly ramshackle cottage, surrounded by a riot of late summer flowers. It looked like a place where real life happened. He took a deep breath and walked up the stone path. Before he could knock, the door opened. It was Maria. She was more beautiful than he remembered. Her face had a softness to it, a serenity that had been absent for years. Her pregnancy was obvious now, a gentle, swelling curve beneath her simple cotton dress. She wasn't surprised to see him. There was no shock, no anger, just a weary resignation. "I knew you'd find me eventually," she said, her voice calm. She didn't invite him in. She just stood in the doorway, a protective barrier. "Maria, he started, but the words he'd rehearsed died on his lips. They all sounded hollow. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. I've changed. They were just words." "Why are you here, Kristen?" she asked, her eyes searching his, looking for the man she knew, the man who always wanted something. "To talk," he said simply. "To listen. To understand." From inside the house, a man's voice called out. "Maria, is everything okay?" Dr. Jason Pereira appeared behind her. He was holding 2 cups of tea, his expression one of quiet concern. He looked at Kristen, then at Maria, and a wave of primal, irrational jealousy washed over Kristen. It was so immediate and ugly it took his breath away. This man, in his simple, unassuming way, had what Kristen had thrown away: Maria's trust. "It's fine, Jason," Maria said, never taking her eyes off Kristen. "Could you give us a minute?" Jason nodded, gave Kristen one last, assessing look, and retreated into the house. The gesture was one of respect for Maria's autonomy, and it was a deeper condemnation of Kristen than any shouting match could ever be. "He's a friend," Maria stated, preempting the question in Kristen's eyes. "He's been kind." Kind. The word was a knife. I'm glad, Kristen said, and to his surprise, he meant it. I'm glad you haven't been alone. They stood in silence for a long moment. The sounds of the small town, a distant train whistle, the chirping of crickets, filled the space between them. I stepped down from the company, he said finally. Maria raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine surprise in her eyes. Why? Because it was costing me everything that mattered. Because the man it turned me into was a man you had to run from. And you were right to run. This was the truth, unvarnished and painful. She seemed to consider this, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly. So what now? You show up here, having shed your old life, and expect what? That I'll just forget? That we can go back? No, he said quickly. God, no. I don't want to go back. That life was a prison for both of us. I don't expect you to forget or forgive. That's not why I'm here. Then why are you? She repeated, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. He took a step closer, his heart aching with the chasm between them. I'm here because I'm going to be a father. And that child, our child, deserves better than the man I was. I'm not asking for a second chance with you, Maria. I know I don't deserve one. I'm asking for a chance to be a father, to be present, to be kind. He laid his soul bare in that one word. It was all he had to offer. Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had shed all her tears for that man long ago. This man in front of her was someone new, someone broken, and trying to piece himself back together. That's not up to me alone, she said, her hand going to her belly. It's up to him. Or her. And it's something you'll have to earn. Every single day. She finally stepped back, opening the door a little wider. Do you want to come in for some tea? We have a lot to figure out. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. But it was an opening, a fragile, tentative beginning. As Kristen Barker stepped across the threshold of the small, flower-covered cottage, he knew he was leaving the ruins of his old life behind and taking the first, terrifying step into an unknown future he would have to build, not with money or power, but with patience, humility, and a hope for grace. The months that followed were an exercise in radical patience. Kristen did not move to Cold Spring. He did not pressure Maria or crowd her space. He respected the boundary she had drawn, a line demarcating her new life from the wreckage of their old one. He sold the cavernous Upper East Side mansion, a public act that was also a deeply personal one. He let go of the symbol of their shared failure. He moved into a modest apartment in the West Village, just a few blocks from where they had first lived, a place where the scale of life felt human again. His new life was structured not around market openings and board meetings, but around Maria and the baby. He drove upstate twice a week. At first, it was for the doctor's appointments with Jason Pereira, where he would sit quietly in the corner, listening to the steady, miraculous thump of his child's heartbeat. He watched with a painful mix of awe and regret as Jason treated Maria with a gentle, professional respect that felt more intimate than any affair. He learned to swallow his jealousy, recognizing it as the ghost of his own possessiveness. Jason was Maria's doctor and her friend. That was all. Kristen had no claim here. His visits slowly evolved. He would come up and help Aunt Genevieve in the garden, his hands, once accustomed only to the smooth glass of a smartphone screen, becoming calloused from pulling weeds and turning soil. He learned the names of plants and the rhythms of the seasons. He and Maria would sit on the porch, talking. They didn't talk about their past. The wounds were too raw. Instead, they talked about the future, a future centered entirely around the child. They discussed names, birthing plans, parenting philosophies. Their conversations were practical, sometimes awkward, but always civil. They were two people learning to be partners in a new, more sacred venture. Kristen started therapy, a real, grueling examination of the man he had been. He confronted the bottomless insecurity that had fueled his ambition, the fear of not being enough that had driven him to acquire more and more money, more power, more validation, until he had suffocated the one person who had loved him for who he was, not what he owned. His atonement was not a grand gesture. It was 1,000 small, quiet acts. It was driving 2 hours in the snow to bring Maria the specific brand of ginger ale that settled her stomach. It was learning how to assemble a crib, his knuckles raw and his instructions hopelessly confusing, until he finally figured it out. It was sitting by her side through a 3-hour birthing class, a silent, supportive presence. The day their daughter was born, the world shifted on its axis. He stood in the delivery room, holding Maria's hand, a permission she had granted him only at the last moment, and watched as Lily Truitt Barker came into the world. He saw the strength, the primal power in Maria's face, and he was humbled to his core. When the nurse placed the tiny, red-faced infant in his arms, the last remnants of the old Kristen Barker dissolved. This was real. This was love, pure and unconditional. He looked over at Maria, exhausted but glowing, her eyes fixed on their daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," Maria said, her gaze meeting his. "She is." In her eyes, he didn't see forgiveness. Not yet. But he saw something new, a shared purpose, a fragile respect, the beginning of a new kind of family, one they would have to build from scratch, piece by painful, honest piece. They were not a couple, not lovers. They were two parents, bound by a shared miracle. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time, Kristen felt he was finally walking in the right direction, guided not by the glow of a stock ticker, but by the tiny, perfect hand wrapped around his finger. Kristen Barker's journey from a self-absorbed millionaire to a humbled father shows that redemption isn't a destination. It's a daily choice. He learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't own love. You can only earn the right to be near it. Maria Truitt, in finding the strength to vanish, ultimately found herself and created a new definition of family, one built on respect, not obligation. Their story isn't over. It's just beginning. Will Kristen's quiet atonement ever be enough to truly heal the wounds of the past? Can a love that was so completely broken ever be made whole again? What do you think should happen next for Maria, Kristen, and baby Lily? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of betrayal, strength, and the difficult path to redemption moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional real-life dramas.
You never think it'll be you. You see it on the news. Those stories about kids vanishing at crowded beaches, mothers screaming into the wind, strangers running in all directions, and you tell yourself you'd never let it happen. You'd never look away for even a second. But I did. And that second ruined everything I thought I knew about control. It was July. The sun was cruel and sweet, burning the salt into my skin, and my little boy, Jamie, was laughing like the ocean was made just for him. He's 5, wild, beautiful, everything good I've ever touched. He wanted to run down the shoreline with his bright red bucket chasing the foam. And I told him, "Stay close, baby. Right where I can see you." He said, "I will, Mommy," without even looking at me. His voice carried over the waves like a promise that didn't mean a thing. The next time I turned around, he was gone. There's no sound like a mother calling her child's name into the wind and getting silence back. It's not just fear. It's the sound of something tearing inside you, something that doesn't grow back the same. Jamie! I must have shouted his name 100 times. My throat burned. I ran barefoot, cutting my feet on shells and driftwood. People stared. Some offered to help. Most didn't know what to do. It all blurred together, faces and colors and useless sympathy. I kept seeing flashes of red. Someone's towel. A stranger's umbrella. Each one tricking me into hope for half a heartbeat. And then the world went quiet. I remember the sky turned white. The kind of white that blinds you. And for a second I couldn't breathe. I thought, this is it. This is the moment my life ends without dying. But then, I saw him. A man walking out of the waves, the water breaking around his body like it didn't dare touch him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black dress shirt soaked through, clinging to muscle and scars. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms, veins cut sharp beneath tanned skin. And in his arms, my boy. Jamie's little fingers were wrapped around the man's collar. His head rested on that stranger's shoulder, and he was crying but alive. Alive. I ran so fast I fell twice, sand sticking to my knees, my palms. When I reached them, I snatched Jamie from his arms and dropped to the ground, holding him, kissing his wet face over and over. He smelled like salt and safety, and everything I'd just lost and gotten back again. It's okay, baby. You're okay. Mommy's here. He hiccuped against my neck. I got lost. My heart cracked again. You're safe now. Then I looked up, and the man was still there, watching. His eyes were a dark gray, cold and unreadable, like a storm that hadn't decided yet if it was going to hit. His hair was slicked back, dripping seawater. He looked like sin and salvation wrapped in a calm too steady to trust. You should keep a closer eye on him, he said quietly. His voice was low, smooth, but not gentle. I stammered, shaking, still clutching Jamie. He was right here. I just turned around, just 1 second. He finished for me, his mouth twisted, almost a smirk, but not cruel. That's all it takes. I didn't know what to say. My chest hurt from the way he looked at me, like he understood something about loss that I hadn't even admitted to myself. Thank you, I whispered. You saved my son. He nodded once, no smile, no drama. Just quiet acknowledgement. Then I noticed something else. His hand scratched, a deep cut across his knuckles. There was blood mixed with seawater. Are you hurt? I asked. He glanced down. It's nothing. Jamie peeked from my arms, still trembling. You're bleeding. That made the man's eyes soften. Barely. It's just a scratch, little man. You're braver than me, huh? Jamie smiled weakly. You came out of the ocean like a superhero. The man actually chuckled, a sound that didn't belong to someone like him. Something like that. I should have asked his name right then. I should have gotten it over with, but there was something about him that made words feel too dangerous. Like if I spoke wrong, I'd break whatever invisible balance was holding the moment together. I finally said, Can I at least know who to thank? He looked past me toward the horizon. No one you should ever have to owe. Then he turned and started walking away. For a second, I just stared after him. The beach around us seemed too loud again. Kids laughing, waves hitting, someone's radio playing. But he moved through it like none of it mattered. I wanted to call out, stop him, something, but my throat closed up. Mommy, who was that man? Jamie asked. I didn't know what to tell him. Someone who helped us. When I turned back to look again, he was gone. Not walking, just gone, like the sea had taken him back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Jamie kept waking up crying, saying he dreamed the water was calling his name. I held him close, whispered lullabies I hadn't sung in years. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, the calm in it, the way the world seemed smaller around him. I told myself I'd never see him again. But the next morning, when I went to the hotel front desk to check out, the receptionist handed me an envelope. No name, no note, just a room key and a single line written on the card inside, for the one who loses everything when she blinks. My hand shook as I read it. I asked, Who left this? The clerk said, "A man. Black shirt. Said you'd understand." I didn't, not really. But I went anyway. Room 502. When I opened the door, it wasn't a hotel room. It was a private suite. Empty except for a view of the ocean and a single cup of coffee waiting on the table, steam still rising. A voice came from behind me. "You shouldn't have come alone." I turned. He was standing there again. The man from the waves, clean now. The cut on his hand bandaged. Same black shirt, unbuttoned just enough to show the edge of a tattoo curling over his collarbone. I said, "You left me a key." "I left you a warning." My heart jumped. "A warning for what?" He stepped closer, and I swear I felt the air change. "You were being watched yesterday. That boy wasn't lost by accident." "What are you talking about?" His gaze dropped to the floor for a second, like he regretted saying it. Then quietly, "Someone wanted to hurt you, or use him to get to me." The world tilted. "You're saying my son, my 5-year-old, was taken because of you?" He didn't flinch. "I'm saying you walked into something you don't understand." "Who are you?" He gave me a look I'll never forget, like he was debating whether to tell me the truth or let me keep believing in the safety of ignorance. Finally, "My name's Luca Marino." He paused, studying my reaction. "And I'm the man people call when they want a problem to disappear." The silence between us stretched tight as wire. I whispered, "You're with the mafia." He didn't deny it. Jamie's laughter echoed faintly from the hallway. He was chasing a seagull just outside the suite. And for the first time since I met him, Luca's face cracked. He looked at the door, at my son, with something like fear. Not for himself, but for us. "Pack your things," he said, voice low. "You and the boy need to leave this place before nightfall." "Why?" "Because the man who tried to take your kid doesn't like unfinished business." My heart stopped. "He'll come back?" Luca's eyes met mine, steady, cold. "He already has." And right then, somewhere below us, a gunshot shattered the sound of the waves. You never forget the sound of a gunshot when it's meant for you. It cuts through air, thought, and reason all at once. I remember the echo shaking through my ribs, Jamie's scream slicing through it, and Luca's hand grabbing me before I could even process where it came from. "Down," he ordered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made my body obey before my brain could argue. He pulled me behind the wall, shoved a gun into his waistband, and peered through the curtain slit. His calm scared me more than the bullet. "Stay low. Don't move." I clutched Jamie so hard he whimpered. "Luca, what's happening? Who's shooting?" He didn't answer right away. Another shot cracked in the distance, followed by the sound of screeching tires. Luca's jaw clenched. He looked back at me, eyes dark as iron. "You're not safe here anymore." "I gathered that," I said, trembling. "But what, who?" He cut me off, already moving. "Pack a bag. Just essentials. You have 5 minutes. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." His patience snapped just enough for his voice to drop an octave. "Someone wants me dead. They think you matter to me. That makes you a target. Now move." That's how I ended up in his black SUV. Heart pounding. Jamie half asleep in my arms as we sped down a narrow coastal road. The sea was on our right, wild and endless, and the city shrinking behind us. "You said they wanted to use Jamie to get to you," I whispered, trying to keep my voice low so Jamie wouldn't wake. "Why, who are these people?" "People I used to work for," he said flatly. "People who don't forgive loose ends." "So you left the mafia?" He gave a humorless laugh. "No one leaves, sweetheart. They just stop following orders and start running." Something in his tone, half regret, half resignation, made me realize he wasn't talking about men in suits and cigars. He was talking about killers. "Real ones, why help me?" I asked after a moment. His hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Because I saw what it would do to you if he didn't make it out of that water." "Because I could." That was all he said. But it was enough. We drove for hours. Jamie eventually slept, his head heavy against my shoulder. When we finally stopped, it was in front of a secluded glass house perched on a cliff, half hidden by cypress trees. "Where are we?" "Safe house," he said. "Mine," I almost laughed. A mafia boss with a beach house made of glass. Real subtle, he smirked faintly. No one expects the wolf to live in a window. Inside, the place was immaculate, modern, quiet, cold. It felt like a museum of a life no one really lived, but the view stole my breath. Floor-to-ceiling glass facing the ocean, waves glinting silver under a fading sun. Jamie's eyes widened. "Mommy, it's like a spaceship." Luca crouched beside him, surprising me. "You like it?" Jamie nodded, suddenly shy. "It's really shiny." "Then it's yours for a while." Something in my chest twisted. The man radiated danger. But with Jamie there was this flicker of something gentler, a softness that didn't fit the rumors his name probably carried in the world outside. That night, after Jamie fell asleep on the couch, I found Luca standing by the window, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. Sleeves rolled up, a glass of whiskey in hand. The moonlight painted his face like marble. Too still, too perfect, too distant. "You're quiet," he said without turning. "I'm processing," I murmured. "Yesterday I was worried about sunscreen and juice boxes. Today, I'm apparently hiding from professional killers with a mafia boss." He glanced back at me, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. "Not how you planned your vacation." I exhaled sharply. "Something like that." We stood in silence for a while, just listening to the waves crash below. Then I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Who are these people, Luca? The ones after us?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set his drink down and leaned against the glass, crossing his arms. "There's a man named Salvatore Rossi. I worked for him for 10 years. He runs half of New York's docks, half the politicians, and most of the men stupid enough to think they're untouchable. And you crossed him." "I buried his brother," Luca said quietly. I swallowed. "You killed him?" He looked up at me. "I saved a girl he was about to hurt. The gun went off in the struggle, but to Sal that's the same thing. So now he wants revenge. He wants me erased, and anyone I touch along the way." The weight of that landed like stone in my stomach. "So Jamie was bait." He nodded once. "I didn't expect them to move that fast. They must have known you were with me before I even saw you." I looked away, guilt flooding in. "This is my fault. If I hadn't gone to the beach—" "Don't," he interrupted softly. "You didn't bring this." I did. Something about the way he said it, like he'd been carrying blame his whole life, made my throat tighten. Hours later, I couldn't sleep. I found myself pacing near the window, watching the moonlight ripple across the waves. Luca appeared behind me, barefoot, silent as a shadow. "Can't sleep?" "Too much adrenaline." He handed me a blanket. "It's colder up here at night." The simple gesture undid me. My voice cracked. "You saved my son, Luca. Twice now. Why do you keep doing that?" He hesitated. "Maybe because I never got the chance to save mine." I froze. "You had a son?" "Had," he said almost inaudibly. "His mother left when things got bad. They ran. My enemies didn't care she was innocent." The silence that followed was heavy and raw. I wanted to say something, but what do you say to a man who's lost everything? Jamie stirred in the other room. Luca's gaze shifted toward the sound, something protective flickering there. "You should rest. Tomorrow we leave early. Where will we go?" "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one remembers my name." He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm before I could stop myself. "Thank you," I whispered, his muscles tensed under my fingers. He looked down at me like he wanted to say something but didn't trust himself to. Then, just as quietly, "Don't thank me yet." The next morning, the world shattered again. We were packing. Jamie was humming to himself, filling his little backpack with seashells. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard glass break in the other room. Luca was already moving before I could blink, gun drawn. "Get down." He barked. I ducked, dragging Jamie behind the counter. Shadows moved outside, the kind that walked with purpose. "Stay here," Luca said, tone lethal calm. "No," I hissed. "You'll get killed." He gave me that look again, the one that froze argument mid-breath. "I've been killed before." Then he was gone. The next sounds were chaos. Shouts, gunfire, glass exploding. Jamie was crying quietly against my chest, his small body shaking. I kept whispering, "It's okay, baby. It's okay." Even though I didn't believe it. Minutes or maybe hours passed before the silence returned. When I peeked up, Luca was on the floor, blood seeping from his shoulder. Two men lay motionless outside the shattered glass wall. "Luca," I crawled to him, pressing my hand against the wound. "Stay with me." He grimaced, eyes half-lidded. "They found us faster than I thought." "Don't talk," I said, panic rising. "We need a hospital." He shook his head. "No hospital. They'll finish it there." Tears blurred my vision. "Then what do I do?" His voice was weak but steady. "Take the boy. There's a bag under the bed. Keys, cash, passports. Go north. Don't stop until you hit the border." "I'm not leaving you," I said fiercely. His hand found mine, blood slick between our fingers. "You have to." Jamie appeared beside me, clutching his stuffed turtle, eyes wide. "Is he gonna die?" I looked at Luca, at the man who'd saved us twice and was bleeding for it now. He gave a faint, crooked smile. "Not today, little man." Then softer to me. "If I make it out, I'll find you." The sirens started then. Police, maybe, or worse. I didn't wait to find out. I did what he told me. Grabbed the bag, scooped Jamie up, and ran. When I looked back from the car window, I saw him standing, barely, but standing. One hand pressed to his wound, the other raised like he was saying goodbye without words. That was the last time I saw Luca Marino, or so I thought. It's strange how quiet life becomes after chaos. You think peace will sound like angels or symphonies or something grand. It doesn't. It sounds like small things. Your child's breathing while he sleeps, the hum of an old refrigerator, the tide rolling in without sirens chasing it. Jamie and I made it out. That night feels like a fever dream now. Running barefoot through darkness, headlights flashing across the cliffs, my hands still shaking from Luca's blood. I drove until the ocean turned gray and the sun rose behind us. When I finally stopped, we were somewhere north, a tiny coastal town that smelled like rain and coffee and freedom. We've been here 6 months. I tell people we moved after the divorce. It's easier than saying the mafia nearly took my son. Jamie goes to kindergarten now. He's thriving, loud, curious, whole. Sometimes he draws pictures of the man from the waves. He makes him tall with a black shirt and gives him a smile. I don't correct him. I've rebuilt pieces of myself since then. I found work at a diner near the harbor. I learned how to fix the leaky faucet in our small apartment. I learned that trauma doesn't vanish. It just gets quieter if you let the day be ordinary enough. But sometimes I still feel him when the wind shifts. When I walk near the shore and the sea looks too dark. When I hear a voice that carries too much calm to belong to anyone normal. I thought I was imagining it. That grief had twisted into nostalgia. But then, one evening, Jamie came home holding a folded napkin from the diner. "Mommy," he said, "a man gave this to me when you were in the kitchen." My stomach dropped. "What man?" "He said to tell you he keeps his promises." My hands trembled as I unfolded the napkin. Inside was a single silver bullet, and written in red ink, 2 words, "Still here." For the first time in months, my heart forgot how to beat. That night, after Jamie was asleep, I locked every door and sat by the window with a kitchen knife I knew wouldn't do much good. I told myself it couldn't be him. It had to be someone else. But deep down, I knew. The next morning, he walked into the diner. Same black shirt, same eyes that never stayed still long enough to lie. But he looked different. Thinner, bruised, like the months had bitten pieces out of him and left only the necessary parts behind. He sat in the back booth, facing the door. The cook whistled. "Your boyfriend's intense, Maria." "He's not," I started, then stopped. There was no point explaining something I didn't even understand. When I approached, he didn't smile. He just said, "You changed your hair." "You bled out on a glass floor," I said quietly. "I thought you were dead." He nodded once, like that was fair. Almost was. I slid into the booth across from him, my hands shaking under the table. "Why are you here, Luca?" "To make sure you're alive." "Well, mission accomplished. You can go now." He looked at me then. Really looked, and the weight of it made it hard to breathe. "You think I'd show up just to check a pulse?" I exhaled shakily. Then what do you want? He leaned back, studying me. Rossi's dead, I blinked. What? He came after me one last time. I finished it. His tone was matter-of-fact, like he was talking about fixing a leak. You're free now. The words hit me harder than I expected. Free. 6 months of fear uncoiled in my chest all at once. I didn't know whether to cry or hit him. You killed him. I ended what he started. And now what? You expect me to thank you for bringing more blood to my door? His jaw clenched. No, I expect you to stop running. My voice broke. You don't get to tell me that. You disappeared, Luca. You left me with a dying man's orders and a bag full of cash. You don't get to walk back in like it's unfinished business. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because if they saw you with me, they'd burn the world to get to you. I needed to disappear before they found your name. The anger in me cracked a little. And now there's nothing left of them. Or me. I didn't know what to say to that. The man who'd walked out of the waves had turned into a ghost long before I met him. We sat in silence until my boss yelled for me to take another order. Luca stood, pulling a small folded paper from his pocket. It's an address, a place outside the city, for you and the kid, if you ever need it. Luca. But he was already walking toward the door. Jamie was waiting for me after my shift, sitting at the counter coloring a picture. He looked up when Luca passed and smiled. You came back. Luca crouched beside him. Told you I would. You're hurt, Jamie said, pointing at the faint scar under his collarbone. Doesn't hurt anymore. Jamie grinned. Mom says scars mean you're a hero. Luca glanced at me then, something soft flickering in his expression. Your mom's smarter than she looks. That night, after I tucked Jamie in, I found myself outside Luca's car before I could talk myself out of it. He was sitting behind the wheel, hands still, eyes on the horizon. I didn't thank you, I said quietly. He turned his head, the streetlight catching on his jaw. You don't need to. I do, I whispered. You saved us, twice. Maybe 3 times if I count what you just did. He smiled faintly. You were worth saving. The way he said it made my chest ache. I wanted to hate him for the danger, for the fear, but I couldn't. Every memory of him was tangled up with the fact that I was still alive to remember anything at all. I can't ask you to stay, I said. Jamie needs peace. So do I, he nodded. You don't have to ask. I don't belong in your kind of quiet. Where will you go? Where I always do, he said. Nowhere anyone can follow. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind was cold. Somewhere waves hit the pier, relentless and soft. I reached out, touched his wrist, just enough to make him look at me. You deserve peace too, Luca, he laughed under his breath. Not in this lifetime. But he turned his hand and held mine, rough skin against my palm. A silent confession. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Some connections aren't built on want. They're built on recognition. He was the storm that had almost drowned me, but also the one that taught me how to breathe again. He let go first. Take care of him. I always do. And take care of yourself. That one almost broke me. You too. He gave a small nod, then drove away. No goodbye. Just the hum of the engine fading into the night. I stood there until the taillights disappeared. It's been 3 years now. Jamie's 8. He's taller, louder, braver. Sometimes he asks about the man from the waves, and I tell him the truth, the short version. That a stranger saved us when the world was breaking, and that some debts are too deep for words. On warm days, we still go to the beach. I let him run ahead this time, let him be wild. I don't live in fear anymore. I watch him laugh, the sunlight catching in his hair, and I realize that love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about saving someone so they can learn to stand without you. I keep the silver bullet in a box under my bed, a reminder of the man who carried my child out of the sea, bled on glass to buy us freedom, and walked away so we could have it. Sometimes I think I see him, on a pier, in a crowd, a shadow by the water. Maybe it's just memory. Maybe he really does watch from far away, making sure the world keeps its distance. But every time the tide rolls in, and the sun hits the water just right, I whisper. We're okay now, because that's the truth. We're okay, not perfect, not untouched, but alive, and whole enough to keep going. And somewhere, I like to think Luca Marino hears it, carried on the wind like the sea returning to the shore, and finally lets himself rest. If you felt that story in your chest, if it made you pause for even a second, don't just scroll away. Subscribe for more stories like this one. Leave a comment, tell me what you think, and hit the like button so more people can find it. Every story I tell here carries a heartbeat. Yours keeps it alive.